Okay, well, it's with great pleasure that I introduce our first speaker, Shay Wilson. Shay is an experienced governor and has been on Kura, Land and Corporations, iwi, Pan-Māori government and international boards. He has also been party to restricting governance boards to be more aligned to tūpuna wisdom and helps to troubleshoot issues for boards and senior management. And as I shared with you before though, what's most important about Shay is he's related to my darling husband. Kia ora, Shay. No mai, over to you.
Tēnā koe, tēnā koutou katoa. Kei te rongo mai?
Ai.
Ai, ka pai. Tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou I runga I te kaupapa nāna tātou waka ui mai. Koutou a tinana atu, a au nei mā teipurangi nā runga I te aoatanga o mate. O te noe me I kau atu ana, ki koutou kua waka ui atu ki roto o te aroa waka, me te tangi atu ki ngā mate, tēnei karangatanga ōku, e takoto atu ana ki tēnei marae ki rai te I, tērai waka uangia I roto I te timatanga o tēnei ata, ko te kuini o Ingarangi, o tira ko ngā mate uua, o roto tonu I Aotearoa, ko tērā taniwa o te ao mātauranga, ko Toby Curtis, o tira ngā mate katoa, rātau kia rātau. Ko tātau tēnei ko ngā mauetangai o ME nei I roto I tēnei rā tēnā koutou, kia ora katoa tātou. Kia ora tātou, I runga I te kaupapa nei, me ki, kei te noo nama tonu au kia koe, Watson, nau au I tono I roto I ngā tau ki muri nei, engari nā runga anō I te nui o ngā mai, te taia, I wakatauria kia taia tinana atu, o tino, nā mate au, I wakanoo mai ki te wākainga nei. Nā reira, uri noa, kei te rongo I ngā ingoa, ko te oanau apanui, ko tauranga moana, me te I atu o te rāko Ngā Kura, aiwi katoa putanoi te motu kei kona, nā reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora everybody, I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully the technology was working well. I te ata nei. Can somebody raise their hand in the audience, or a couple of you, so that I can see that you've got, can see my PowerPoint, please? Oh, ka pai. Choice. Thank you, Ra. So, tēnā koutou, as Kiriana said, I am Revel's whanaunga, her husband's whanaunga, and my children are also from Tiki Rangitukia as well, on their mum's koro side. He's a Rickard. And my wife's name is Riria, just like our kuia Riria that's in the audience. Nā reire e koe, tēnā koe. No maunga rua pe ua au, o ti rā no ngā iwi katoa o reira. No maunga rua pe u, e ke kōriporipo I ngā awa, o Wanganui, o Waitōtara, o Rangitikei, tatu mai ki konei, ki Wangaiu, kei te raki anō, ko te kōpua kāna panapa, no e rā iwi katoa aku mātua. I'm number 9 of 9, and yeah, probably the spoilt baby. And that's some of us at one of my sister's tangis, number 9 of 9, and about 9 whāngai brothers and sisters. And as I was growing up, some of the older ones had already left, so I grew up in a household of about 14 plus mum and dad. In a Māori affairs house in Ohakune, and here I'm here today in Raitihi for my cousin's tangi. I live in Hamilton, ki te roe o Takuaene, ko tētei tā ona no Ngāti Porou, engari I tupu ake ai I roto I a Tainui. Watson hassled me. I say hassled because each time he tried to get me, my calendar didn't work, and I was really looking forward to being able to give back this year, because for once the calendar worked. So just want to acknowledge you, Wari, but appreciate the opportunity to be able to connect online today. What I thought I'd do is I'd just give a bit of a kōrero, and you can either ask questions as we're going, but it's been suggested that we wait till the end. And yes, as has been said, I've been on a board of trustees, and negs and nags drive me nuts. And have been fortunate to be on a number of boards, both for our people, for government, for the private sector, and also overseas. And you get to go to all of these different governance courses, and some of them are really flash and all of that. But I think my first governors are people like in this photo. It's my mum's brother, Uncle Matt, in the blue t-shirt, bluey greeny t-shirt, and mum's sister, Auntie Joan, and mum's first cousin, Uncle Tahu, with the longer shorts and singlet. And I think about them as my first governors, because what happens often is you can go to an Institute of Directors course or some other course, and the lingo is the most up-to-date lingo, and we then tend to follow that instruction, especially if we're new to governance, rather than thinking about what were the governance lessons that we were raised with. And I'm mindful that the olds knew which house to have their hui in. Very rarely would they have their hui in the wharekai. They would always have it in the warepuni. And for obvious reasons, you know, that's where you have your kōrero. Even if having a table down in the wharekai is a lot more convenient, they would still go back to the warepuni to do that. And I think that's really important, because when I look at different settings, I'm not talking about place, but it's all about context. And how do we set the right context to foster good questioning and good decision making? In addition to that, they would use the right language for the right context, and use the right language for the right response. And we all know that sometimes you can get away with things in one language which would be highly offensive in another language. And I think about the other week at the Koro Neihana, there was a certain kai kōrero who had everybody in fits of laughter, and it was hilarious and appropriate I roto I te reo Māori. Mo taua wā tonu, engari, me ka kōrero I roto I te reo Pākehā, it probably would have been taken in a whole completely different way. In addition to that, behavior and the Western lives that most of us live, and I say that deliberately, the Western lives, because not many of us live together anymore. And even if you live on a papakainga, you probably, or at least the papakainga that I'm connected to, they tend to still have this privateness about them in certain contexts. And therefore, I talk about behavior being important, and they showed me that because they might have a big argument, and as soon as the hui is over, they would go up, or that take is over, they would go up, hongi and tangi. And because they lived so closely and intimately with each other, you didn't need to hold it for a month and get shitty and then not want to talk to them, because you had to live with each other all the time and keep working together. And so I just want to put that as a setting, because the lives we live today mean that sometimes we don't get the chances to have those conversations we would if we were living closely together, to find solutions rather than holding it till the next hui. And what they taught me is a few things, and none of this is rocket science to you all, but I thought I'd just share them anyway. And the first one is that you have to care for the kaupapa that you're on, rather than it just being another tick on the CV to help you get to where you really want to get to. And that's probably not so relevant in the kura space, because often we're struggling to get trustees, but there are others in other governance spaces, and especially in the iwi and the land entity space, where some of our people are just getting there so that they can then get a few more ticks on the CV to then get them somewhere else where they're getting an 80,000 plus board salary. And so you'll notice by the tenor of my kōrero, I'm going to just be straight up, because often people will share kōrero and don't necessarily share the wounds, because we're too whakamā to show the mistakes we've done. And I think it's actually better to share the learning, otherwise we're not being helpful. Cultivation, I think it's really important to be curious, to read, to listen to podcasts, to ask questions, to find out what else is happening out there, so that you can cultivate ideas and continually have good ideas, rather than being in the hui and go, oh yeah, I tautoko that. And often I've found that there are many people who say, oh yeah, I tautoko that. And that's all they say for a whole year, or for three years in the term of that governance position, which, though it's nice to have tautoko, I think one of the most important governance lessons I've heard or points that have been raised by my father-in-law is that the best skill to have is the ability to think. And that might sound really arrogant. But if you're somebody who's saying, oh yeah, I just tautoko all the time, then you might be just a follower rather than a person that needs to be helping lead a conversation. And there's nothing wrong with followers, but it's really important that we cultivate ideas and that we wai wakaro. Conviction for me is more about allowing our puku to guide us rather than the noise and the Hollywood movies that inhibit us from saying things in the mind. And so I think it's really important to have conviction, which is different to courage. And you hear this phrase today, oh, we must have courageous conversations. And 9 times out of 10, the people who talk about courageous conversations are just talking about courage and don't often exercise courage, because you just have to make a decision. And too much of the time, decisions aren't being made because we're too scared to offend somebody. And I don't go into a hui to offend, but I go in knowing that I have to make a decision, and I have to have had enough consideration, which is why cultivation is important, to get to a decision. And for me, a decision isn't about agreeing. A decision is about resolution. To find a solution, kia kōkiri tonu ko ngā mai. Because if you don't do those types of things and don't have those as some of your po, those key values that can help guide, we enter into the state which I think Te Ao Māori is going through. And I only say that because through my day job, I get to go and help a number of trusts and boards, senior management teams. And I came up with this phrase that the Koroirangi Effect is happening. And it's the stalemate or the tyranny of indecision. And some will convince themselves, oh no, we've just got to get all of the whakaaro from them. When actually getting too much whakaaro can be dangerous because you get into a stalemate. And you have to just make a decision, and you shouldn't be on a board if you're worrying about offending anybody, because being on a board isn't about popularity. You go to Parliament or go on council if you want a bit of popularity. Going onto a board, you have to make decisions, and it's really important. Otherwise, you end up with problems. You end up with staff leaving because there's no decisions being made. And we fall into the trap, oh, but the whānau got to have their say. All good to have say, but we often, and I've found this really common in more recent times, and that's because we've adopted this mongrel called democracy. Oh, everybody's got to have a voice, you've got to represent them, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, our tupuna might have had representation, but that was associated to skill as well. And we want our people to make important decisions. And if I look in the iwi space, we want people to make decisions about millions of dollars, but a lot of those people don't even make decisions about their own pute and their own house. But they want to make decisions about the millions of the tribe. And that's just ego, whether people like to admit it or not. And so when I received the emails from Tui, she outlined a few things. And so I'm responding to those things if people are wondering, why is this fella painting a bit of a bad picture of governance? And it's really because we need to be honest more with ourselves about how hard it is, but also face it. And I use the Koroirangi Effect because I think of my own waka, Aotearoa, and like other waka, it got stuck in the koro of the Koroirangi known as Te Korokoro Te Parata. And when I think about that, and I think about the Karakia that our tupuna use, ki mai nei ngā tua te pō, and the other Karakia associated with that event, that what it's also describing is they're learning from being in that physical issue and how they then replicated it to give us guidance in the Karakia and the waiata that are associated with that event. Because what it's describing is human characteristics and dynamics. And so the Koroirangi Effect can take us to a really dangerous place. And so here's some points I want to raise. It's really important for us to do our homework because some will go to a meeting and go, oh yeah, sorry, I didn't get time to read my meetings. I've been so busy. And that's just not a good enough answer. And I know that for myself because I've done it. And then decisions are made. And they're really important decisions. And yeah, I made the mistake. But it's really important to do the homework and to find the facts. And I came up with a mantra a few years ago doing some mahi back home in Ohakune with our community, not just with the wānau and the iwi, but with the whole community. And we came up with this mantra, stats, stories, solutions. Get the data, get the facts, get the information. Otherwise, the hui is full of I reckon. So get the stats, but then link it to real stories, real situations on the ground, so it's not just numbers. And then you can create solutions that are guided by two solid po. And so doing the homework is about making sure that you don't just read what you need to read. And then part of that homework is also making sure on the other side, if it's a new trustee, that you don't just give them a piece of paper or a folder of information and go, oh, here's your induction, read this, and all the answers in there. But the induction, as part of the homework, is, create some cahoots where there are key questions that as a board, you have to be able to get right before you get to the next cahoot. And it's not about getting whakamā if you don't get it right the first time, but it's about doing more homework so you can then get it right. Or some other forms of tests or games, and I like Kahoot because it's a bit of a game, so that you can do your induction in another way, and then that's getting the homework done as well. Another key part about decision making, which is really important to remember, is we have to minimize the noise in here, those internal conversations that some people will acknowledge they have, and the majority will ignore and say, oh, no, I don't do that, when actually they're having a big conversation in their head as they're saying, no, I don't do that. Because those movies can be real, and they can be Hollywood award-winning movies. And I heard Kiriana talk about Taika, and he creates some amazing movies. And actually, we do as well in our heads, and that can take us to a stalemate where we then don't want to make a decision. So we have to minimize the noise. And you're not there to please people. You're not there to please people. You're there to make decisions to ensure that the kaupapa is cared for, and ka kokiri tonu ko ngā moemoe I wawatatia e te unga I tīmata Ngā Kura, tatu mai ki koutou ngā kai kawa I te kaupapa I tēnei wā tonu. Something that I'm still learning, according to my wife, and I think she's probably right, is that we all need to say no more. Because if we say no more, that can give us better focus. One of the other challenges that I've noticed that we're facing in governance, and probably more so iwi governance rather than here, is the entitlement and, oh, we need to help this, we need to help that. And actually, we end up wanting to be the New Zealand government on your board budget. And we then start to feed entitlement, and whereas your job should be just what it is to do on the board. And I'm not saying to be mindful about other things and how we can help, but we often tend to want to go out of our scope. And what's better is to work with other entities within the iwi, within the community, within the rohe, so that you can mahi-tahi together. And it's even better if there's an overarching strategy by whoever the best entity is to develop that with the support of others, and then you all feed in, including the kura, feed into that, so the kura knows what it has to do at the overarching level, as well as what it has to do for the kura specifically. And always manage expectations. Don't overpromise, because all that builds is hoha, and hoha feeds kiriweti, and then kāriri te iwi. So those are some points about the Koroirangi effect, and that stalemate or the tyranny of indecision, and how to try and navigate that. And I developed this model a few years ago, and it's an attributes or characteristics model. And I developed this in the hope that we move away from democracy and that we focus in on skill. And I also developed this because one of the worst things we did in transition to this risk culture and to needing a lawyer and an accountant all the time is we gave wisdom the boot, and often that was we gave our kaumātua the boot. And I'm talking in an iwi context here, rather than ensuring that we have all the skills that are available. And so for me, the Ariki model is this. Huirangi Wai Kerepuru once said to me, the word "a" is potential. Ātua is the potential beyond which you invoke or draw to the present. Āhua is the potential that's been given realization. Ariki is where potential is minimalized to allow others' skills to come to the forefront. And so ka iti ake te ariki kia tū tēnā, kia tū kotahi te katoa. And I share this because I've had a number of years having a wānanga with others and with myself about how we have allowed the anthropologists and ethnographers to translate, and we continue to use their translations. Classic example, aroha. They say aroha is love when we know that it's bigger than love. They say tikanga is protocols and customs. And I think those words aren't helpful because they come from a context of thou shalt not, rather than you have to make a decision based on context. And so as you look at these words, I ask you to potentially look at them differently. And so that a ariki isn't necessarily the chief, but is the person who has been given an important role, but also allows others to come to the forefront so that their skills, their gifts are able to be utilized for that context. And so you've got this model here. And in an ideal world, I think a perfect governance table would have all of these skills. And I want to share different translations. So the ariki is the enabler to allow others to come to the fore, therefore doesn't need to be at the top. In addition to that, the outside circles can swap with the ariki when they're coming to the fore. And if we start at the bottom, rangatira, the rangatira for me is the people whisperer, the person who can get there and has the ability to communicate with the people really well so that they come on board the kaupapa, come on board the journey. Moving around, the kaumātua in this context is that person that holds wisdom and doesn't need to be old, but has the skills that can lean in deep to wisdom when you're asking the questions. One of our kuia who passed away this year, she was just about 90, and she was on our iwi board right up until last year where she stepped down. And her ability to ask the right question in the middle of an investment conversation was amazing. And that wasn't because she was really strong on reading the profit and loss balance sheets, or whether she understood return on investment in the modern lingo. She understood return on investment by how many potato seeds she had to save for her next crop. That's how she understood return on investment. And because she got that, she could get the other thing and then provide really wise counsel. Moving up again, tohunga. experts. And probably in this modern world, we tend to lean too much on experts more than anything else. And so we go for an accountant or a lawyer or an investment person rather than having a well-rounded board. The tohunga ahurewa, for me, is the person who can inspire magic, allow people and help people to fall in love and continually fall in love with our genius, with our superhero characteristics of us being Māori or us being Ngāti Porou or Ngāi Tahu or whoever. The toa in this context is the doer, the person who will get the stuff done. Because we need the doers who aren't going to do the management's job, but can actually see, okay, this is what needs to be done, bang, 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 and then can give the right advice to help that happen. And then the matakite is the person who can help visualize that 5-year goal because they see today so well. And so that's the dreamer, the person who can find, okay, if we can do this, then that'll get us to there in 10 years. And by that time, we would have had a whole brand new school by then. And so quite different translations of these terms. But for me, it's about identifying what are some of the key leadership titles of our past that can potentially be interpreted in a modern context to help us find solutions rather than just leaning on representation of that whānau or that hapu or that grouping. But how do we focus in on skill and remember that because the ariki is the enabler, the toa can move to the middle and the ariki moves out, or the rangatira or the tohunga or the whoever. And so those are just some thoughts on how a new model of governance could happen. I was asked at the Pūtea Whakatupu hui recently, how do has this been implemented? I have been using this in a couple of boards that I've been on at a very basic level, because often it's still voted on, but then I've used it to identify the skill gap. And what are the skill gaps in our group, rather than saying, okay, we've got these and these, but we need an accountant. Because do we need an accountant, or do we need an expert who can clearly understand numbers better than the rest of us? Because we still have to understand numbers, but is there someone else who might have done finance but not accounting? Whatever. So the Ariki model is an option that can help us focus in on attribute rather than representation. So trying to move along to stick to my timing. Some thoughts on the journey for you as governors. And I'm mindful that the situation is different to land entities or iwi or other boards, but some of the core principles are still the same. And I think one of the really important things is that the board are only a spoke in the wheel, not the hub. And I say that because too many of us, and especially if we've got big egos, think that the board is the be all and end all. But it's just one of the kai hoi on the waka of your kura. Yeah, probably the steering hoi, but remembering that there are other paddlers in that waka. What happens in some boards is that we can tend to live a long way away, and at least in kura boards, you're usually in the same community. But just because you're in the same community, it's still really important to foster the relationships. And especially as you get a new wave in, to always stay away somewhere together. Stay at the marae or somewhere where you get the time to not just have the work sessions, the hui or the wānanga sessions, but to have that cup of tea. I'm a firm believer in the mana of the cup of tea, because prior to us, I'll say it. Prior to us getting a bit too flash, most of our decisions, most of the most important decisions in Te Ao Māori were often made over a cup of tea, where we would be going around visiting each other and saying, hey, we need to do this, we need to do that. And that's all about relationships, that you can do that. And through that, you then find that collective kaupapa. I've covered enough on the koroirangi, but just make the decision. And some of you might be frowning at the moment, and some of you might be going, oh yeah, I know a number of examples where we didn't make a decision and it just caused the raruraru. Just got to make it. That's your job. And as I said in the Ariki Model, focusing on what are the key characteristics or skills or attributes that are required to get the job done. And remember what that job is, because you can't do anything. You can't do everything. Yes, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. So he pito kōrero tēnei, hei ngaungau mā te pīnati, me te wakaaro ake ki tēnei mea te decision making, because we just have to make the decisions. And if you don't start up well and don't do clear induction well, then you're setting those new board members up to not make the best decisions either. So he kōrero paku tēnei, and apologise once again. Te taia te aere a tina nātu, nā runga i te mate, was able to change the time for the surface so that I could do this still. But yeah, me I kau atu ana ki koutou I roto I tēnei rangi, tēnā koutou. Me e pātai a koutou, pātai a mai.
He mihi tino nui ki a koe Shay, mōhio au kei te, you have to go, you've got things, but we will take some quick questions very quickly. If anyone, questions, comments? Anyone? You've obviously, we have a question. A comment? Yeah. Ka pai. Shay, they love your straight upness. I think he might have got that from his tiki rangi tuki, a partner, maybe. Yeah, another question or comment? How long? How long did it take to implement the Ariki model?
So I haven't been able to implement it as the full model, but what I've been doing is using it to identify skill gap. And if you've got a voting system, it's really hard. But if you can create, and so what I've been saying to people is create it. When you set up a new trust of any sort, and like any trust, you've usually got a shoulder tap first. And so that's the best time to do it. And what you have to do And I've done this in 2008. We started doing some really significant culture changes for our iwi rūnanga, because some of the trustees in the iwi trust were about to take each other to court. And so the old said, oh, you kids need to do some work out how we change things. And we were really lucky they gave us a blank sheet. And this is separate to the Ariki model, but it connects. We did a review and we did all of that, but then part of the implementation is we composed a brand new Karakia for the tribe. And we translated it in English. And we say it at every hui, and we say it at the beginning and at the end. And what it does is it forces people to behave. And, you know, the English translation is, let us return to our origins, returning to the time prior to common knowledge, returning to the time of the ancient knowledge, searching, understanding the evolution of life, absorbing the force of Father Universe, absorbing the energy of Mother Earth. I now know who I am. I am the first shiny scale of the great fish of Maui. I'm the energy that turned the fish to land. Warmth embraced, cold embraced, I am the blanket of snow. And we carry on the kōrero about all of the maunga, the awa, etc. What we didn't realize that would do is it changed behavior. And it reminded everybody that when they stood up, that they were standing up. They were standing up as the first shiny scale, as the glaciers of Ruapehu, that they were standing up as the blanket of snow. And more than that, they were no longer trustees or rūnanga reps or anything. They were called Pātai members, so that they would behave like you would on the Pātai if you had manuhiri coming. And okay, sometimes you get some of our people not behave on the pai, but then it's for the rest of the pai to correct them. And so what I didn't talk about with the Ariki model is that there's another part to it, which is about culture change. And we also agreed that we would, for all of our rūnanga meetings, and not only every 2 months rather than the trust meetings, which are every month, and the rūnanga is the wider people, but that we have to have a wānanga the day before where we go out to wāhi tapu, wāhi tupuna, learn waiata, whatever, so that we get to nohotahi and remember our relationships with each other rather than, hey, there's that mongrel over there, wait until I get into the meeting. And so it requires two components, both culture change, and not culture change from a human resources perspective, culture change from the aroha that's embedded into our tikanga. And then starting off, otherwise, if you've got sorry, I'm talking too long. If you've got a structure where you have already got things, you'd have to then find some agreement on how to implement something like an Ariki model. Long answer, sorry. It's a question from a bean online.
One more.
Right. There's somebody online wanting to ask a question.
Someone online. Do we have
Hi.
people on?
Yeah, Ben. Hey, Akwe.
Kia ora mātua. Thank you for your kōrero. A question around the Ariki model. Those various roles, are they interconnected or are they just specific for one person?
Yeah, they are interconnected, and sometimes one person might have more than one of those attributes. And so because they might have more than one attribute, you make it work. And I think that's the thing, which is why I steer away today from translating tikanga and kaua as protocols and customs, because protocols and customs are often concrete. Whereas as I see every hui I go on to, there's always a slight difference. And because tikanga allows us to adapt to context. And so the same with the Ariki model, Ben, that sometimes you can have more than one role. Sorry, Kiriana, you were saying there was another question out of...
Yeah, and now I can't count because someone else has put up another hand here. Kia
Hey,
ora. One more,
I've still got time. There's an ope on and
Okay.
one of the relations is covering it for me, so I'm all good. I can see the ate.
Yeah. Did you hear that, Shay? Yeah. How do you navigate LAW with LORE, I guess, for kind of?
Yeah, so I no longer prescribe to LAW and LORE. I see kawa as LAW. Because, and the reason why I don't prescribe to it is because LORE is often connected to myths and legends. And our kōrero tukuihu are not myths or legends. They are science. They are an intimate understanding of how the creation of this earth was made, and it was put into a certain form so the majority could understand, and then encoded so that the experts could then hold the code for everybody. And I've made the conscious decision not to say that the law and tikanga are different. And I've had a number of people challenge me on that, and we've had some really good kōrero about it. And yes, there are things where we can take each other to court on, but it's, in my experience, drawing on a range of expertise can get us to a really good ground. And I say that because we have to find that really good ground, not a middle ground, but a really good ground, because we're all on a journey of decolonizing or re-indigenizing ourselves. And so I will, at the end of each week, think about what's happened and think about how many colonized decisions I've made, not to beat myself up, but to remember, okay, because some of our tikanga is colonized, because we've fallen for the trap of someone else trying to input their beliefs into us. And I'm not talking about whakapono. I'm talking about the way we do some things and go, oh, no, this is the tikanga of the old people. I saw it. Yeah, you did see that, Auntie, but I also know you didn't understand what they were saying. And so they would have said this was the context, but because we didn't have the reo, we missed the whole picture. So I think it's a journey. It's a journey to work it out. And you've just got to be clear in yourself as to how you interpret law and kawa and tikanga. For me, kawa are principles that are gifted to us from creation. And tikanga is that which we find is tika in the implementation of those principles. Knowing that tika is normative, and so it changes as societal norms change. At one stage, it was tika to kill somebody if they did a certain type of hara. If a person did a certain type of hara today, I'm not sure whether we'd find it tika to kill them. And then we have ritenga, which are the habitual practices that come out of tikanga. And though some people will say that kawa and tikanga are the opposite way around, but what I know is that you don't tā i te tikanga when you open a house. You tā i te kawa. So yeah, kawa and tikanga, kawa and law, we just have to continually discuss how we work through that. and remember not to use either of them as weapons.
Hi, tēnā koe anō, Shay, and I wrote out a few things, but they're down there on the table. But what I remembered, Shay, was you're inspiring the magic, talking about it being fun, and also, you know, take a bit more notice of what our puku's telling us. And that's just very quickly from, I wrote heaps, but I think that I just want to mihi to you, and I just love it. And I'm thinking, gee, I feel like I want to go on a board now, Shay. So ka nui te mihi kia koe. Over to you, Watson.
Kia ora rā.
Reira kei te hoa, aroha nui kia koutou, Shay. Aroha nui kia koe, brother.
Kia ora rā. Tēnā koutou. Ngā manaakitanga kia koutou. Kia ora rā. And make the decision.